Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing? It's great to see everyone present today. We are extremely happy for those who are participating online. Please feel comfortable to write in the chat. Hello and good morning, well wishes. My name is Jakesha Wiley. Currently, I have the privilege of serving as your Acting Associate Vice Chancellor for Educational Equity. Welcome to Day 4 of Access Week. We've been experiencing a vibrant week of dedicated programming as we honor our theme of unlocking the pathways to success with a strong emphasis on the culture of care, which helps us reinforce our commitment to holistically supporting our students. We are spotlighting our academic, social, and cultural resources that are crucial for the success of our first-generation low-income students and those who are underserved. With thought-provoking public lectures, hands-on workshops for our faculty, staff, and students, and the dynamic student programming that we've been having all week have all been designed to inspire, to educate, and build a more inclusive community. So, this is a disclaimer. We are recording this event. You are giving Rutgers University the permission to record your images, as well as grant us for all rights for any form of media, whether it's educational, promotional, or advertising. If there is any concerns, we have our DICE staff at the front table and some associated, situated in the back to support us. I do want to acknowledge the land in which we stand on is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. We pay respects to the indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora, past, present, and future, and honor those who have been historically and systematically disenfranchised. We also acknowledge that Rutgers University, like New Jersey and the United States as a nation, was founded on the exclosures and the erasures of the indigenous people. My favorite, I love to take a pause to acknowledge the space that we are holding today as a community amongst ourselves, but most importantly with one another, especially as we navigate this current institutional, local, and global events, social issues, ongoing tensions and contradictions, the heightened antagonism toward actions for equity, inclusion, diversity, and access, the impact and presence of illness, daily distractions, pressing deadlines, competing priorities, both personal and collective grief, and things beyond our controls, both spoken as well as unspoken. I'm personally grateful for you to be in community with us today. Now, of course, some housekeeping. When you came into the room, in the front is our ladies' room. In the back, we have our males' room. We do have gender-neutral bathrooms for those necessary. We also have a prayer, lactation, meditation room located on the G2 level. We'll have staff along our sides of our room to support with Q&A. We also have a staff member online to support our online questionings, so please feel comfortable to write us in the chat or feel free to ask questions. Now, we went over our welcome, and I have the esteemed privilege of introducing our speaker today. We are going to talk about some amazing, amazing work. Dr. Gardner is currently an assistant professor of student development administration and scholar practitioner in the field of student affairs and higher education. Prior to this role, Dr. Gardner served as Assistant Dean of Students at Loyola University Chicago and has 12 years experience in crisis management, multicultural affairs, and residential education. Gardner received her PhD in higher education from Loyola University Chicago, a master's in education and student development administration from Seattle University, and a BA in early development from Mills College. A fun fact about Dr. Gardner, she's a proud alumna of the SDA program and served as the assistant director in Xavier and Trident Murphy Apartments. As a queer feminist, Black feminist scholar, Dr. Gardner continues to radically imagine the success of those on the margins of society. Her research agenda centers race and gender equity in the workplace, the experience of emotional labor at historically white institutions, and scholar practitioner identity development. Dr. Gardner's passion for social justice, collective leadership, and student-centered practice fuels her commitment to cultivate compassionate learning environments that empower graduate students to see themselves as scholars. In this way, she pushes graduate students to think more critically about building caring communities and creating lasting change in their spheres of influence. With cura personalis as a guiding principle in her professional practices, students can always expect to be reaffirmed, to be celebrated, to be seen as a whole, both inside and outside the classroom. Today, we will be actively engaging in a workshop titled Releasing the Mask We Wear, Identifying and Disrupting Emotional Labor in Leadership. Dr. Gardner is going to lead us and guide us through the complexities of emotional labor in the workplace and offer strategies to foster authentic and collaborative leadership. I'm so excited for this presentation, so I would love online and in person if everyone could please welcome Dr. Paige Gardner to the stage.
Good afternoon, you all. How's it going? I love that we have this intimate space with one another, and I'm pretty interactive. So at some point, when it's time to be interactive, you'll probably want to make sure there's at least 2 people at your table so that you have someone to engage with in our activities. As mentioned before, I am a scholar practitioner, which means I'm in my practitioner bag today. With my experience working in various offices, I think it's important that we take time to think about how theory connects with our practitioner work and how practitioner work informs the theory that we have out there. Given the theme of this week's Access Week, I think emotional labor is perfect when we think of culture of care. And that word, cura personalis, which you said so perfectly, is a term meaning care for the whole student. So as faculty, as someone who's also been a practitioner, the students have always been at the forefront of the why in terms of what I do. And so talking about emotional labor is important because it's almost like that airport saying, right? Put the mask on first before you help others. And so the idea of emotional labor is, and unpacking it with you all today, is that we think about the ways we are caring for ourselves and how that then allows us to care for others in intentional ways. Okay, before I do anything, I want to make sure I get it now. They're arrows. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so releasing the masks that we wear. One thing about emotional labor is that, and I'll get into a bigger definition about it, but emotional labor can be really constrictive, right? And there's no real way to kind of get out of utilizing emotional labor when we're in a field of practice that requires us to care, right? So at times it feels like we could be stuck in a mask. And sometimes that mask looks like, hey, how are you doing? My name is so-and-so. Come in, kick your shoes off, get relaxed. Whatever that is, in service to someone else. So if we stay in this mask for too long, y'all, it's gonna get sweaty, uncomfortable. And so when we talk about emotional labor, the way that I prepare us to do that, we've got to take this mask off so we could really be our true, authentic selves, right? And how we show up. And that can be hard, especially dependent upon the identities that we hold, right? That impacts the ways in which we feel we can really show up in the spaces that we operate. So hopefully today there will be some ways that we can identify and disrupt the ways that emotional labor shows up in leadership. That can be for our students, that can be for our staff, and for our faculty. We also have some case studies that we'll go through as well this afternoon, focusing on those 3 populations, and so you get to choose which case studies you want to engage in and think critically about. But before we get started and knowing kind of where we're at as a larger community, I think it's important that we ground ourselves. We come in carrying a lot. And oftentimes we conceal it, right? That's that way of kind of keeping that mask on, keeping things intact. But what I've learned since the pandemic and teaching during a time where everyone's lives changed, it was important in my classes to pause and just create space for folks to ground themselves, to get connected. And so I don't know if folks tend to do breathing exercises, but that is my jam. And I also realized that I wasn't really doing it for my students, I was doing it for myself. And then in my evaluations from students, one of the number one things they appreciated was having that time to ground before the start of each class. And then that became a request, like, hey, can the adjunct faculty also do this? And all that jazz. So I like to do that, and I'm going to encourage us to kind of just get grounded. You're seated. If you need to stand, you can. Get comfortable where you are. Just make sure your feet are grounded, flat on the ground. Make sure you're in a position where you can take some deep breaths in and deep breaths out. And together, I would love for us to do 3 deep inhales and exhales. I also like to put a hold in there so that you can hold that breath before you release it and then release together. And then after we do our 3 breaths together, then I will kind of walk us through some of these prompts here as we just kind of sit and reflect and get connected in this moment. So let's take our first inhale together. Hold. Release. Let's take another deep breath together. Hold. Release. Let's take another deep breath together. Hold. Release. And continue to be connected with your breath as I kind of walk us through some simple prompts. As you think of the word emotional labor, begin to set your intentions for how you want to engage in this space. Think about what drew you in to attend this workshop. Think about the ways you've experienced emotional labor. What are those feelings that come up for you? This is your time to think about how you want to share that in this space. This is also a time for you to kind of track that inner critic voice that tells you, we got too much to do. We don't have time to reflect on the ways we've been harmed. Who are you to think that emotional labor is a real thing that you're experiencing? This is the time for you to recognize that inner critic and quiet that voice. This is also a time for you to release limiting beliefs that you're not deserving of thinking about the ways emotional labor impacts you. Maybe the limiting belief is more of a fear. If I start to be more my authentic self, will people care? Will that harm me, right? This is a space where you can begin to release those limiting beliefs. And then as we prepare to be present, tap into what brings you joy and purpose to the work that you do. And allow that energy to just come through as you are learning and sharing your own wisdom and experiential knowledge within this community, whether being in person or online. Whew. And I don't know about you all, when I do that, I'll be like, okay, I am ready to go, I can engage. And it's also normal to have all those different thoughts flowing through our minds. But I've learned that simply recognizing them just creates a little bit more space for me to be present in the moment. So my encouragement now, just as a way to build community, and there's folks that are online as well, is let's check in. How do you come into this space? So you have a chance right now to use this QR code. And we're going to come back to this QR code a couple of times. So once you've got it up, you could just make sure that it's handy for you. And whenever you see this on the screen, that means that we're going to do something with that QR code. But the first question is just more of, how are you arriving in the space today? Right? What's on your heart? What's in your mind? You get to choose how vulnerable you want to be. It could be one word, a phrase, a sentence. And then something I didn't think of was being able to show on the screen how everyone's doing, but hopefully you all will be able to see that. And as long as you're able to see it, we're winning. And then you should be able to, heart other people's comments or respond to comments that are being shared, especially if there's some similarities. Okay. And for me, how I come into this space, y'all, I am stressed, overwhelmed, uncertain about higher education, my role within it. Much of my work that I do centers diversity, equity, inclusion. And so to see that under fire right now is challenging, right? But within that, I still am managing to hold on to some type of joy that allows me to separate from the institution that I work at. It's a place of employment, is not all who I am. And so I find joy in the community that I've carefully curated, people that I love. I hold tight to my dog, my little puppy. Today, he is 6 months, right? So it's the little things that I'm able to find the joy in that carry me through, even through these challenging times. So let's go ahead and get started with our content. In true student affairs fashion and faculty fashion, I like to give a map so folks know what you're getting out of today. I'm going to define emotional labor, and this is as academic as I'm going to get with you. There's a model that I've designed with some of my own sister colleagues around emotional labor. So we're going to define it, learn about it, its context within higher education, and then we're going to move into talking to one another and sharing our stories with an operationalized definition. How are you then experiencing or connecting to the ways I'm defining emotional labor? There's ways that you can engage online with the QR codes like I've shared. Then, so that we don't stay in this loop of, wow, this stuff is hard, or it's bringing up a lot of things, the idea is then to think about strategies to help us maximize our agency. So even with the emotional labor we have to engage in our professional roles, our student leader roles, our faculty roles, there are still ways that we have agency and we get to choose how we show up, right? So that's where I want us to spend the bulk of our time. We'll talk about these strategies, and then we'll have case studies where you will kind of talk through with each other how these particular strategies might come and help the individuals that you're reading about. And then last but not least, we will just do some brainstorming, and the action plan is not really a full action plan, but you get to leave on the Padlet board one strategy that you think you can walk away utilizing after this session, and that is like a simplified version of an action plan. And then there's room for Q&A whenever, so you can ask questions. I'm very interactive, so don't feel like this barrier between us means that you can't ask questions. And then conditions for success whenever we're engaging in vulnerability, I think it's important to have ways in which, like, what's the container here that's going to hold us today? And so it's important that we embrace acts of vulnerability and vulnerability on your terms. So I'm not saying that you've got to turn the volume all the way up, but my hope is that folks will tap into their ability to share stories and personal experiences. You get to choose how far you go with that, and that's what challenge by choice means, right? So I'm not here to dictate what that looks like. I want us to be mindful of our positionalities, and positionality means what are the different roles that we wear, right? So if I'm the acting vice chancellor, assistant vice chancellor, and I'm with someone who's a direct report, I want to be cognizant that that might impact the way some of the storytelling unfolds, right? And so how do we hold space and be mindful about the positions that we hold? Using I statements are always important. You are the expert of your experience, so it is not on me to dictate, like, the validity of the experience that you choose to share in this space, but we do not speak for others, we speak for ourselves. And then respecting confidentiality. So what's shared in this space stays here, right? What's learned can go. So you can still say Dr. Paige was dope, and I loved that she talked about emotional labor, but maybe you don't have to share specifics, right? In terms of like personal things that I'm sharing. So that's ways that you can think of confidentiality. All right? If we had more time, if we were more in an intimate space, then I would say, what are other things that folks need, right? But here are just some core things to think about when we do some of the group work activities. All right, so let's get to emotional labor. I love, before getting all academic, I love the personal connection to what emotional labor looks like. And this first picture that you see up here, I wonder if this is a pointer on here. I think this is the pointer. Okay, so this picture right here actually says me debt-free. But right now it's free, that's still cute. But I love this picture because, y'all, I wasn't paying bills. I had no worries in life, right? I was excited to be a big sister. But there's other things happening in this photo that aren't apparent or that represent aspects of who I am. I'm the oldest in my family, and as a big sister, I was socialized to be a caretaker, right, for my siblings. I was socialized in my church, right, that you show up your best self and that you don't cry. We don't have time for crocodile tears. We got to keep it moving. And before Black excellence was the term, it was just known growing up in the church that I was a part of that it would not excellence. If it's not excellence, we're not accepting anything below that. So I knew I had to show up a certain way, no matter how I felt on the inside, no matter if I was tired or my feelings were hurt, I better show up and act right. And those are the simple ways that we start to kind of be socialized into the identities that we hold. I also was, or am, a Black woman, but grew up in a predominantly white town called Hollister. So there was other messages that I was learning as well from the school that I was a part of. Me and my siblings were oftentimes the only Black children in that space. So I had to learn, in order to be seen a particular way or to combat stereotypes that adults had of me, I had to perform in a certain way to gain trust, right? Or to be seen as that good Black kid, right? And so those things were happening to me at a very early age. It was not an option, and in order to survive in spaces that were not designed for me, I had to perform accordingly. And that kind of locks into what emotional labor looks like and feels like. And some of these other pictures as a high school student, again, being the only Black student and one other brown student, right, in this photo. But being a student leader was one way that I could help combat those stereotype threats. Going to college as an undergrad student, so right here, that is where I got access to the language to describe the experiences that I had in this predominantly white town. So it was very liberating to understand I wasn't crazy, the feelings that I had, the anger that I experienced. And so that emboldened me to become a student activist, right? And here's ways that we organize each other. But in that organizing role, what we were also being socialized to do was put everything on the line. It didn't matter if you were sick. It didn't matter if your grades were suffering. It didn't matter. You had to show up with your peers and do this work, this meaningful work that's needed. But it put my health at risk at times, right? There were times where I wasn't going to class or I wasn't getting the best grades that I could be getting because I knew that this fight for greater justice was so important. But we didn't have that support to help us regulate emotionally what we were doing to ourselves as well by doing our all-nighters back to back to back to back, right? Not hydrating, things like that, right? And so that's a fun time in my life as well and a meaningful moment, and I would not change it either. But the idea of the emotional labor that's needed to sustain movements isn't talked about enough. And then here's another picture I think that just indicates the passion and the joy in student affairs that I experienced. So facilitate mini retreats. I do a lot of work around women of color experiences, but that comes from me being a staff working with women of color spaces. So this is a retreat that we had. I can't believe it's almost been a decade since I've been doing this work, but it's incredibly life-giving, and it can also be tiring, right, being in these roles and having to self-regulate and help others regulate their emotions as well. So that's how I often like to introduce emotional labor. Before I get into some real definitions, what words come to mind for you? So this is your chance. You can go on that Padlet, and the second column is, column is where you can add words that come to mind. And then also, because we're in person, feel free to just say out loud, yes, what words come to mind for you?
Online, we have busy, stress, nonstop, stress again, and then others are filtering in. I'll let the room.
And then raise your hand if you'd like to share a couple of words that maybe haven't been shared yet. That'd be awesome too.
More have come in from online. Hardworking, gendered, draining, stress again.
Stress is a big one, right, for emotional labor? Totally makes sense. Let's get into why some of these words come up. I tend to agree with all of those, right? So emotional labor in the workplace. Now, when I say workplace, for staff and faculty, that's our place of employment. But when I also think about students, the student leader roles that you hold are tied to a workplace. And also maybe some of those organizing spaces that you're in as well require some level of investment and committed time that you're devoting to. So you could be an active community member and still experience emotional labor, right? So workplace is a broad word that I'm using. And so just to like operationalize this, I want you to think of emotional labor as something that comes from almost like a triangle, right? And there's some key players in this. There's an employee, right? The person who's hired to do something, to do work. There's the customer who receives the benefits of that work. And then there's management, the person that's overseeing the work of the employee, right? And there's an exchange between these three key players, right? And there's pressure involved at times to perform a certain level of work that satisfies customers and also satisfies your management or your institution or your supervisor, whatever that might be. It is the employee who is the performer, right? Carrying out whether it might be the mission of your institution, the organization. So in this case, it would be Rutgers University, New Brunswick. That is kind of the management, right? And it's oftentimes our students and their families who are the customers in this scenario. And if you're a visual learner, I've got a visual coming up so it makes sense. But emotional labor tends to be that unpaid, unnoticed, we don't talk about it, but it is kind of the thing that keeps us moving. But it's unpaid, unnoticed labor that can easily be overutilized. And like what's said in these words that were shared on Padlet, stress can be a part of that experience, but oftentimes over an extended period of time, it leads to burnout, right? Or shutting down, or making decisions on whether or not this work makes sense for me moving forward, right? But that can be long-term effects when you are extended in emotional labor for too long. How many of us engage in emotional labor that is unnoticed, right? It's not in your job description. Your job description doesn't say you should expect about 30% of emotional labor. Like, it is unnamed, unseen, but it is very real and it's very experienced. And it's also gendered at times. So women are socialized, or folks with marginalized identities are often socialized to give more, to accompany others more, right? It is not an option for us. It's just something that we're socialized into doing as well. Why is it hard to detect? This is one of my favorite images, huh? Emotional labor where? Prove it. I think that emotional labor becomes hard to detect because we're in a system that is basically commodified education. So customer satisfaction now kind of overrules decision making, right? Even if it doesn't make sense. If we're trying to foster accountability in our communities, but then a higher entity says, actually, give this student what they want on the low, so that we can kind of maintain the money that's coming in. Or, hey, this student or this person, is a part of a family that donates. So we're going to so education is commodified, where students, it's what students want. Even when we think about how institutions are designed physically now, and how much it costs to be at these institutions, it's the money that's going in to keep building these infrastructures, but it's all about giving the look that we are wealthy, we're a wealthy institution, we are up to date in our technology services, all of these things, and that's what's going to keep students coming in, right? So everything's about the dollar. The institutional structures and flow of power as well. So there's a hierarchy in terms of how work is done and what's valued as enough work or not, right? And so those institutional structures might mean, okay, so the flow of power is a VP or a vice chancellor might not be on the ground working with students, and maybe it's been a long time since they've engaged with students that you forget the effort, the time, the energy that is required to do that advising, to be there in the trenches with students when crisis occurs. And so that flow of power kind of makes it harder. The more you get up to the top, the further away you are from what's happening on the ground. And so that emotional labor gets lost the higher up you move. And then we're also in a particular field where ethic of care, advocacy, and collaborative leadership are necessary in order to be good at the work that you do. And those things are important, but they require a level of commitment and investment that is often more than what the job requires on a baseline, if you truly want to be transformative in the work that you're doing, right? And the same with our student leaders, right? Like, it's not enough just to host an event. You want to make the personal connection. You want to be vulnerable. You want to advocate for your peer, right? So it usually takes more than just what the job description is asking you to do in order to do stellar work. And so, again, for my visual learners, this performer, whoever you are, students, staff, faculty, whatever you're hired to do, you are often spending time appeasing your management and appeasing or satisfying your customers. So this is a one-dimensional lens by Constantine and Gibbs, right, back in 2004. My sister colleagues and I took this model and expanded it because we felt like it still wasn't critical enough in helping us understand why emotional labor is so challenging. We designed a multidimensional lens which allows us to understand how power, privilege, oppression shows up and impacts the way that you engage in emotional labor, the way that you cause emotional labor, like through particular roles that you hold. So what makes this more complex is if you have privileged identities, and insert any identity, right, whether it be with race, gender, religion, whatever that might be, that privileged identity might impact the performer, right, in terms of being, for example, dismissive. So, hey, and this is my example for me, right? Oftentimes I was asked as an assistant dean to do a lot of the in-between work of kind of getting Black students to be good, right? We want you to be the representative for the executive leaders because we don't know how to engage with them, but you know how to do that, so we're going to ask you to get them to calm down. Because if we do it, we're uncomfortable, but you should be comfortable doing that, right? And I'm like, yes, I can do that. However, the pushback is students want to hear from you all, right? So I can be this in-between person, and I can help facilitate the dialogue, but in terms of communal accountability, you are missing at this table, and it's needed. But sometimes we are asked to be that mediator and that person who is solving the issue. And oftentimes those identities are not taken into consideration. So, during the time as an assistant dean and being asked to kind of be that mediator while watching Black bodies die on TV, right? Not taking into account how I'm affected by what's happening on a national landscape, but also saying, yeah, and we still need you to do this work regardless of how you feel about it, because we pay you to do that. And that's kind of what's held over you, right, to kind of require those things to get done regardless of how you feel. And guess what? Sometimes we do have to do those things, right? I think the purpose of this work, though, is to say if you are staying in that position of overextending yourself with an emotional labor and not caring for yourself, not healing, not setting boundaries, it becomes really difficult to continue to do the work in a way that's effective and meaningful or fulfilling. And that's where that burnout comes in. So power and positionality makes a difference too, the type of title that you hold. And then your targeted identities. Exploitation is a big part of emotional labor. We're banking on you being passionate about justice and inclusion so that you could be on the front lines while we focus on other things, right? And so the targeted identities means this is where exploitation can happen a lot. And there are times where, even for me as a performer, sometimes I'm in the management role, right? And so what does it mean for me to be cognizant of how I'm asking the employee or the performer or my graduate student to show up in their assistantship, and be cognizant of the context at large and how that might impact the performer. So it's my job when I'm in this role to also be mindful of how I'm causing emotional labor to be experienced. Okay? And then for customers, again, like our students, they are the ones that we are serving, right? So we want them to have quality experiences. So that is, what emotional labor looks like on a visual standpoint. And the emotional wear and tear is a big part of what comes out of this. And oftentimes we are managing others' emotions, so we've talked about that a little bit. We're also managing institutional expectations and our own personal emotional expectations. So if we continue in this cycle, it begins to cause this wear and tear in our practice. And if it goes unresolved, it can be challenging to continue doing that work. And here are things that make it harder and harder. When you do not receive clear communication, right, or validation in the process of doing your work, recognition for the time that you're putting in, or encouragement to take time off after doing so much work, right? Compensation also impacts our wear and tear. So if you are paid under what it is that you're actually putting out, it becomes harder and harder to focus on the work. And that compensation doesn't have to be just through money. That's through the use of your time, the ways in which you are encouraged to take the time back or not, the networking opportunities where you can secure sponsorship, mentors who are invested in your career and advancement, right? That materializing. So how many of you have been in positions where you've been in a position for, 5 or more years, and no one has said, hey, you know what, because of the work that you're doing, I see you doing, I want to make sure that you get to the next level in your career. That's also a way that you can recognize or validate someone's value. So I don't want to keep you at this level, but oftentimes, based on those targeted identities, and when we talk about exploitation, folks are in these positions where they have to be stagnant because they're not being supported to move their way out. There's only so long that you can stay entry level, right? You should be encouraged to continue advancing and moving in your careers or in the work that you are doing so that it continues to be challenging, exciting, and new. So those are things that cause that emotional wear and tear. And y'all, just when we thought we made it through something, which was the coronavirus, now we have even more viruses that we have to worry about. We also are dealing with the national landscape of what's happening around us and how that might impact education at large, right? So all of these things cause an additional emotional wear and tear in our work. Lots of pressure, lots of stress, lots of the words that were shared online. So after doing that study with my sister colleagues, I began to do, again, some more work with women in higher education. And here were 5 categories that came up in terms of the types of emotional labor that they were experiencing. And then you'll have some time to talk with each other about, are these things that you're experiencing as well? So emotional labor often sounded like constraining your personal feelings. How many of us have felt like we couldn't really speak our truth because it would all of a sudden penalize you, right? Or hold you back? Yes. So oftentimes that pressure of, I need to be the good team player. I don't want to be the one who's rocking the boat. I'm even seeing that language already right now as we're gearing up for what possibly will happen with the Department of Education. The language of, we don't want to be reactive. We want to understand what's coming our way first before we make responses, right? So constraining the personal feelings. Positively upholding your institution and department at all costs, even when your institution is dead wrong, and you still want to be that good team player and say, no, 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 just trust, we're going to get through this, right? That constraining the personal feeling, knowing that it's not okay. And then that continuous feeling is that you're silencing yourself, right, as a result. Combating exploitation. We talked about our targeted identities at times. So being the go-to person, the expert, right, for all things related to race or all things related to gender or sexual orientation, etc. Caring for others beyond your capacity. Like constantly, I was up every night, supporting and coaching my students through crisis. I've heard that a lot from my colleagues who work in student affairs, right? And especially when you share those identities with your students, there's this additional tax or like pressure to be present because I want to be there for you because I know what it felt like. And I need you to know that you're going to make it, right? So combating the exploitation. Performing excellence. That one, I've known that since I was a young child, even within an identity group of folks. That was a survivalist mindset, right? So prioritizing work productivity over wellness. Unrealistically expected to produce perfect work. There's no such thing as perfection, but we're constantly being pushed to do our best, our best, our best. Now this one's my favorite, emotional gymnastics. Y'all, when you are trying to decode communication, I don't know what this means, but I'm gonna try and fill in the gap. Anticipating the needs of others before they can even tell you there's an issue, right? That's emotional gymnastics. You're all over the place, right? Constantly filling in the gaps when you're not asked to, and managing conflicting messages. And then constant exhaustion, which as I continue to do this work, I've learned that I actually now say permanent exhaustion, and it's almost like you're a zombie, just walking around doing what you're asked to do, but you no longer feel, you're just kind of numb and you're moving through it, but constantly overwhelmed with your workload. I don't know how I'm getting through the workload. That's actually how I've been feeling as of late right now. I don't know how I'm getting the things done that I'm saying that I'm committed to doing, but I'm getting them done without really savoring or enjoying or understanding the joy of the work that I'm being asked to do. And that's because I'm always exhausted. No time to implement the self-care practices in the workplace, etc. And sometimes you can experience multiple categories of these at one time, which makes it hard to parse out. But these were kind of the 5 areas that came up with the woman that I was engaging with. So I'm very interested to find out, what emotional labor are you experiencing, are you familiar with, or have witnessed, right? You can put it in the chat, but I also would encourage you, if you're in person, that you actually take time to talk to each other about what you've seen. And I'm gonna go ahead and go back to this other slide so you can see these, and just be in community with one another about how this is experienced. So feel free to talk to each other. Which of these are resonating with you? Are you challenged by some of these? Have you witnessed? Yeah.
Online, we have performing excellence, constant exhaustion, constraining personal feelings, performing excellence again, constant exhaustion again, emotional gymnastics is in there 3 times.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for that.
personal feelings, help.
Thank you.
Combating exploitation, constraining personal feelings, Emotional gymnastics. Someone said all of them.
Yes. Yes. All of them. I'm curious if we have someone who might want to share some insight of what you've observed or what's resonating for you and why. Do we have an extra mic to pass around? Yes. Okay, Brittany has a mic. If you'd like to share, I'd love to hear some examples of it. Yes.
My name is Sherry Cunningham.
Yes, Sherry.
The table was talking about the constraining personal feelings while also simultaneously emotionally doing the gymnastics. So in short, you're not allowed to process your own feelings and you're kind of performing. You're on this hamster wheel while also trying to decipher and sort someone else's feelings, which is like an impossible task. Sometimes you don't even know why you feel the way you feel, but you're also trying to navigate the feelings of another person. And sometimes an emotional support blanket to assuage feelings and performing excellence to then combat exploitation. It kind of like all falls into one in a like perfect storm for constant and permanent exhaustion. Therapy's necessary.
Yes. And it's hard too because if you're not engaged in doing the self-work, it's hard to see how you inflict emotional labor or cause others to engage in emotional labor at a level that's just not necessary. And so that can get hard too if you're working for someone who also has no investment in understanding how they impact others. This hamster wheel becomes really challenging because you're walking on eggshells 24/7. Thank you for that. Yes. Other thoughts or examples? Yes.
Brittany and I were talking, and I think it goes along with what you say about being a good team player, but also having like a people pleaser mindset of like you're always the first to volunteer to do something, or you're always the first to say like, oh, I'll do that, just so you feel like people think that you're doing a good job. And so if you feel like you want to pull back from that and not be a people pleaser, there's also like the worry of, are people going to think I'm lazy, or I don't want to be here, I don't want to do the work. So I think like the people pleaser mindset is part of this.
I appreciate that. And oftentimes when I work with graduate students, I describe it as when you get that first job and you want to do your best work, you want to show that, hey, I got this job for a reason. I want to give you all the gifts up front. And my reminder to my students is good work is rewarded with more work. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do good work, but you don't have to pop out all the tricks immediately. Like, let it be earned as well. You want to observe, are you really supported in just the baseline work that you're being asked to do before you excel to your best, and then realize that you're stuck and then expected to operate at that level, and there's guilt around wanting to scale it back. And so I appreciate you for sharing that. That's something that comes up often with my grad students.
I was looking at performing excellence just as being a mom. I mean, I have to think about everybody else in the house, and it's, unrealistically, I'm expected to produce the perfect work. I have to do a million things. Just this morning, I have to bring this there, bring that there, you forgot this, order the medication, do these things. It was supposed to be my time to relax before I came in to work. Yeah. And it wasn't, because I have this, it's unrealistic to get everything done. And then I have, and it's not that my friends are being mean, but they're saying like, oh my gosh, you have this handled amazingly. And they're trying to pump me up, but they're kind of in the back, they're making me feel like if I let everybody down, it's really gonna fall hard. So I kind of wish they would be like, are you okay? Like, do you have everything? And just kind of be a little bit more real.
I appreciate that this piece around performing excellence can be very dangerous. And we are in that Obama era of this idea of like, see, if you could perform like this, then everything's fine. Not necessarily. One of my sister scholars is Dr. Sharday Davis, and her work her theory is on the strong Black woman, right? And how we have to dispel that myth that being strong is an unfair place to put folks in a category of. Oftentimes we need to take care of the strongest, right? And there's ways to be considerate and supportive or helpful, not picking that same person every time, right? Asking other folks to step up to the table. And oftentimes that performing excellence and constraining the personal feeling is, if I say I can't do this, will that diminish everything? Or will that diminish how people view me, right? So there's something to lose if I actually speak up on the need to scale down how I'm engaging. The other thing that came up for me in hearing you is that emotional labor is not just relegated to the workplace. Oftentimes, what's happening in our personal lives also shows up in our professional lives. Like we say leave the personal issues at the door when you walk in, but that's actually not true. It's actually not true. What's happening on a national landscape impacts how I show up in this workspace. I'm worried about family, the safety of even my chosen family, right? Our identities are being erased as queer and trans folks. And so it can be really challenging to continue showing up at this high level and then get trapped in being seen in that way. Yeah. Anything else? Anything else online? Oh, okay, great. I love this. All right. So now we're going to move into sharing our experiences, going a little bit deeper. And we had started doing some of this, and here are the reminders of our types of emotional labor. But again, if there's room for folks to maybe go a little bit deeper now and to talk about how your social identities or positionality shape your experience of emotional labor. Like we've kind of talked about which of these resonate, but how might your own social identities and positionality shape that experience? So take some time to think about that. And if you're in the chat or if you are online, I would encourage you all, if you want to share your stories in writing, that is also welcomed in the chats. Yeah, so take some time to go a little bit deeper. All right, folks. I hate to interrupt good conversation. I want to appreciate folks for being willing to share some of their own stories and experiences. And sometimes it's tricky to start thinking about, right, how our social identities and positionality impact the experience of that emotional labor. I'm not going to do any share-outs because I want to respect kind of those personal connections that are being developed. But I hope that you'll continue those conversations when you can. So the last portion of this talk is focusing on maximizing your agency, right? Especially when we're trying to manage the emotional labor. Because like I said before, the purpose of this presentation is not to say, you should never experience emotional labor. That is actually tied to this profession. We are a part of humanities, Everything we do is with intention in terms of curating a student experience, right? Whether it be on the academic side of the house or in their co-curricular track, right? And so emotional labor is a part of it, but how do you scale it back so that you can reduce, the level of burnout that you might be experiencing in your work? Also, when we go through these, the idea is not that you've got to go on 10 for each of these recommendations. It's more about exercising and building your capacity to enact these recommendations, right? So no one's expected to be perfect in all categories. Some of them you're like, I'm already doing it, that's great. Others you might be like, all right, I want to work on that a little bit more and be intentional about who I reach out to help me improve in that particular area. So you want to exercise those muscles, and then the idea is to know when to apply. And that is how I want folks to think of these agentic strategies. So here's 4 of them. One, I think, it's like an obvious, actually I think all 4 are like obvious strategies, but they actually take more time and effort than one might think. So creating your systems of support, or SOS, creating your SOS, means that you want to think about your community, folks who are in your corner, who support you, who challenge you, who aren't just saying, yes, you're doing good all the time, but also care about what's happening beneath the surface. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Protecting your time is a huge game to play, and it's tricky when you're an employee of the institution or an agent of the institution. It's hard to protect time, but we'll talk about some of those strategies, and I'll be curious if other folks have ideas too. Speaking your truth, like showing up as your authentic self and being able to speak your truth is so important, and also a challenging, balancing act. And then setting boundaries with the type of work that you're doing. So we're going to work through these 4 things, and then we'll move into some case studies. So your SOS, people and spaces that are invested in your personal and professional needs, your personal success, all of those things. And I tend to whittle this down to the safe spaces that you have. And as I do more research right now on spiritual formation, I would even say safe space to me, safe can be hard because you can never guarantee that 100% safe. But I guess more of the essence of safe space for me is what's sacred, like protected spaces where you can be your full self. So sacred spaces is kind of what I'm starting to use now when I talk about this. And I tend to see these most often in mentoring relationships and the communities that you're a part of. So your mentoring relationships can be affirming, right? Where you have someone who can actively listen to you, so not just be your yes person, but also help you think critically about the circumstance and the strategies that are needed to address the concern that you're experiencing. It also offers space for that coaching and that guidance, walking things through. How many of you have had to call a friend or something to be like, girl, is this email all right? Like, read it as if it's me, right? I do that all the time, right? Because my tone, sometimes I'm speaking that truth a little too hot. And so I need someone who understands me, understands the work that I do. So that's important too. Having a mentor who understands the work that you do. What can you potentially lose by doing this? You need someone who understands all like levels or context of what you're experiencing. And then what I also love about mentorship, and I talked about this lightly, but social capital exchange is also what's to be gained from those mentoring relationships. So not only is this mentor or group of mentors people who are like rooting for you and cheering for you, they also are here to share wisdom, give you connections, right? To either leave a situation that's not working for you. So, hey, I called my homegirl, she works at this other institution, you might want to consider it. Or, hey, there's a promotion coming up, I think you need to go for that, right? There have been times where I almost talked myself out of work opportunities. And one of those examples, I was an assistant director for Student Diversity and Multicultural Affairs. And I was thinking, like, okay, it's time to look for another job, and I wasn't in a doc program yet, and there was this assistant dean position that was open, and it sounded dope, but I was like, I can't apply for that. I'm just an assistant director. I'm not in a doc program. I don't think they would consider me. And I had someone out of the blue, and here's the deal for mentoring. Your mentors don't always have to share the identities that you hold. In fact, it's important to have a robust and diverse group of mentors, right, who play different roles in your professional and personal life. So there was, who I consider a mentor now, but she was a white woman who was in that assistant dean role, and we just so happened to have lunch, and I was telling her I was preparing to leave, and she was like, wait, why would you leave when my job's about to be vacant? And I think you should apply for it. And I was like, I don't think I can. Like, here's why. She gave me all the reasons why I should. And something about it, I still didn't trust her recommendation, but because she pumped me up, right, I called another mentor to just be like, I just want a second opinion. Do you think I should apply for this? And then she was like, well, let's look at the job description and walk through each item to see if you have that experience. We walked through it, and she was like, Paige, you do this in your sleep already. I agree with what this woman has told you. And I was like, what? Y'all, I got that job. Like, I was able to move into an assistant dean role and stay at my institution. But I would never have, if I left it to myself, sorry, Mike. If I would have left it just to myself, I would have talked myself out of it. And I'm a woman of color. I'm also queer identified. We, in all three of those categories, are the folks who tend to shy away from opportunities the most. So my encouragement to you is when you have like that board, your own personal advisory board or your mentoring group, run those ideas by the people who are invested in you and rooting for you. Let them pump you up. And so one of those mentors was a reference for me, and then the other person gave me more insight on that particular job because she held it. And she was like, so here are things that you're gonna wanna talk about. They know these things about you, but here are other things that you might wanna talk about. So she coached me up in a way that really prepared me to be my best self when I interviewed for that opportunity. So again, that is why those mentoring relationships are so important. And then your community is equally important. These tend to be, in my opinion, more identity-based relationships. So those sacred spaces where our identities align, I can let my hair down, I could talk how I need to talk, I don't have to worry about code switching, none of that. And oftentimes, I feel most comfortable in these identity-based relationships where I can be my full self. This is also the community where I have assembled my allies or people I consider accomplices, right, in creating change. We share similar philosophical ideas. And so when we do need to challenge the system, we're going to organize together because we speak the same language and we know how we need to maneuver, right? And then within this community, which is interesting, I put therapeutic support here as well. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be about work, but I realized in that assistant dean role, I was also like starting a doc program, and I had plenty of other things going on. I needed space to just, where someone could hold a mirror up for me and help build the courage and the audacity needed to be my full self unapologetically in all aspects of my life, not just my professional, but also in my personal. I was realizing that I needed to set boundaries with family too in order to have space for myself. And I was all the way in Chicago, families in Georgia and California, and I'm over here trying to be a ref for everybody, and I'm leaving next to nothing for myself. So I needed that therapeutic support for someone to hold the mirror and say, but what about you? And I was like, oh. And so then we started to build skills around that. And so these are things that I call sacred spaces and very intentional in terms of your systems of support. In terms of protecting your time, y'all, this is easier said than done. So much easier said than done. So protecting time, right? I realized that I'm someone who used to have like a calendar that was just blocked. Like, I mean, different color code systems, all that. If you looked at my calendar, where was your lunch break? Where was did you step outside of the office today? Or did you just sit at the computer the whole time or sit across the desk meeting with people, right? And I mean, I do not count your walk across campus to a meeting as that dedicated self-time. You also need space to just walk and be you. So I've learned over time that in protecting my time, I have to build mindfulness into the work schedule. So remember how we did that breathing exercise? I do that in my class, but I also do that at the start of my morning. And then I also have like a closing ritual at the end of my day. But building the mindfulness, a space to breathe or be in nature is helpful. Prioritizing your personal and professional needs, like you have to start prioritizing what is really needed and then letting go of the extras. Normalizing taking time back. I'm so guilty of this, y'all. I will do all the things and not calendar in my time back. So one of my strategies, I'm someone who's kind of a rinse and repeat girl, so I know what each quarter is going to look like. So if I already know that I've got a retreat that I'm facilitating, even this talk, like I'm coming back and I still blocked off half of my day tomorrow just to kind of like rest and recover. So how do we normalize taking our time back? When I was a program coordinator, we knew all the events we were doing. So I went ahead during the summer and blocked added extra measures on my calendar around the times that were really busy. So Access Week is great. Hopefully you put time in your calendar to get time back as a result of going hard in that particular week that you needed to be on. And then rituals, so I talked about that briefly, but I have this kind of rule, unless you're at a higher position than me, like I'm not taking any meetings between 8:30 and 9:30. That is like my protected time to get the day started, to write out the tasks that are most important to me to get done before everybody else's tasks that are being asked of me. And even when I was a doc student and an administrator at the same time, I really had to get good at that because I still had to be a student after the work was done. And so it really forced me to think, what are the most important things in order to keep this job that need to get done? And then everything else, like we'll see where we can fit it in once I have the time to do that. And then at the end of the day, around 4:30, this one I'm not as consistent with, but blocking that last 30 minutes of your day to be like assessing what you got done. Were there challenges? Are there things that you need or people you need to follow up with? So that the next day when you get in to organize your time, you can kind of see the notes that you left for yourself, right? And that's how you close out your day. Another thing that I started doing that's actually really fun, how many of us have heard of the book Rest is Resistance? Yes. You should definitely check that book out. There are these rest decks, and I actually started including pulling a card from this rest deck, which gives me some inspiration for how I practice rest in that particular day. And so you can either do it at the beginning of your day so that you can think and be intentional about how you're going to rest in this busy day or week, right? But you could literally pull a card and say, I want to channel this for the whole week or the whole month or just the day, whatever that is. But it forces you to be intentional about your time and where you are prioritizing your needs, your self-care, even as a professional during a work day. No matter how productive you need to be, you still need to be rested, right? And then scheduling your vacations and time back in advance. So these are the things that I kind of do in protecting my time. And then speaking your truth. So protecting your time can be challenging logistically, but speaking your truth there's a fear in being your full self sometimes. And that could be because of the identities that you hold. It could be because of the hierarchical nature of your institution. But those things impact how you speak truth. So again, just as much as you might experience the fear in being your full self, it takes even more energy to conceal those feelings when you know something is wrong and something needs to be addressed. You're spending more time like being angry or upset and suppressing, which is not helpful because then you might just pop off, which doesn't help either, right? And so we want to recognize that. So instead of putting the energy in concealing, I would say reutilize that energy and practice your courageous conversations. So this goes back to your SOS crew, right? Like, who do you have in your corner that you can practice courageous conversations with? Hey, for example, I had a direct report who they are a part of my chosen family group, but I was their direct supervisor, and sometimes, you end up working with friends. So I was like, I gotta hold this person accountable, and I'm really afraid to have the honest conversation, but it needs to happen. And so I reached out to a colleague in a different department, who understands the context, the nature of my work, and we practiced. Like, I asked for advice on how to approach it, and then we practiced what that conversation was. And one of my strategies when having these challenging conversations is to name the multiple hats that I'm wearing. So we're gonna have this meeting, and I recognize the personal relationship we have outside of the workspace, but for this position and my role as your supervisor, I gotta have a real conversation with you about job performance, right? And then that led to us working through a plan. Like, how can I help you be your best self? But here's what I can't allow to happen anymore. But I had to practice that, y'all, a couple times with my sister colleague to feel okay with doing that. And there was conflict around the identities that we share. There was conflict around, I don't want to I don't want to be perceived as someone who's disrupting someone's progress in their professional work. But communal accountability is important, right? So I had to practice that. Then you have to understand your political terrain. What is at risk here by speaking your truth, right? And then again, going back to that advisory board or that mentor or that sacred space to kind of weigh out your options. What happens? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst, right? So that you can understand what you're putting on the line. And sometimes the intent is to blow it up, but that can't be the idea every single time when you are also navigating your career, especially if you're someone who wants to stay at your place. Now, if your intent is to leave, that changes how you approach or practice your courageous conversation. And then prepare to negotiate your time and energy. So what that means is there's times where I have to talk to my supervisor, my dean right now. She wants us to do so many things. And I'm like, I love you. I will follow you wherever. But also, if you ask me to do this, here's what has to come off my plate in order to get it done. Then it's back on them to decide whether or not it was that important for them to ask you to do that task. And so that's how you negotiate. Like, which one is more important to you? Because they all can't get done, right? So those negotiations are also important. And you all know there are times where we are just going to have to, like, roll up the sleeves and get the work done. But there's always room for conversation around the impact and then saying, where else can I slow down then? So if you have me working hard this week, I have to slow down within the next 2 weeks. Here's where I intend to do that. I need you to approve that, right? So thinking of those things. And then last but not least, setting boundaries. So engage in courageous dialogue and then set boundaries that minimize the emotional labor. And so my best example of this is just to show you like a chart. And I literally had to go through this one time when I was just kind of doing too much, like as a doc student, a full-time professional, and all the other things happening in my personal life. So I had to list my values and priorities. So my values and priorities were the following: time, being a supportive campus partner, like I'm very engaged, very collaborative in my leadership style. And then my well-being, like I needed to be grounded. So then here were the needs and here were the plans to kind of make that happen. So create your chart. For me, I needed calendar assistance. Like I needed to be able to block my calendar for appointments. I started using Calendly, Calendly or your institution might have their own version of that, where people can't just go to my calendar and take up all my time. When they select, there's certain dates that are available for them to select. And then it's just less time on my end trying to go back and forth with someone, but also my time is protected, right? And then for supportive campus partners, ensure that I have balanced commitment to institutional needs. So I can't be on every committee. So how are we sharing this work departmentally? So I had to make sure, here are the list of committees that my department needs to be engaged in, and how do I divide that up amongst my team so that I'm not the only spokesperson. And that also means that you have to be comfortable with saying, it's kind of like around ego, like I don't have to be the spokesperson for my department every time. There are other folks who might need space and time to shine, so I'm going to let other folks represent the department. I can't be at everything. And then well-being was me needing a safe space for emotional release, i.e. therapy. So I was doing that therapy work, right, when it comes to the well-being piece. So yeah, and then here, I guess I started telling you my plans for these other pieces. But that's how reducing that committee participation and delegating those responsibilities, and then creating sacred time for therapy. And what I would also say for well-being, in addition to therapy, so I also love singing in church. And I was like, that needs to be a thing. So I have choir rehearsal on this date. I'm not scheduling anything over it unless I am sick. Like, there's nothing else that I'm going to do to change that or my therapy appointments. So I was very clear about that with my work and with my colleagues who I worked closely with, so that they understood that that was also a value and a priority, right? So these are things that I tend to do to help set the boundaries. And it also creates a culture of transparency. You don't have to give this plan to every single person, but my supervisor understood what I was trying to do, and the team that I supervised understood what I was trying to do. Then it also emboldened them to do the same. You all can set boundaries too. What are your values and priorities in your position? What should I be cognizant of as well? And how can we change things around so that you can achieve some of those priorities and values that you're saying are needed? And then we move into negotiations, right? So this also becomes a tool that you use when you are in a supervisory role and as a student leader as well. Again, especially as a student leader where the boundaries get even more blurred because it's not, you might be a president of a club. So how do you do this with your team? So that you can still be well as a student first and then in all other aspects of your life. So we've got some case studies. I'm going to do a time check. Okay, great. We have time to do case studies, and there's 3 of them. You don't have to do all 3 of them. The idea is that you focus on 1, maybe 2. And I have a case study one that focuses on a student experience, so you could choose that. I have a second case study, and I do apologize for, when you PDF a Word document and then it changes the formatting. So I do apologize. I'm sorry about that. The case study 2 is focusing on a faculty member. And then case study 3 is focusing on a staff member who is a director. So your table, it can be your table or you can be paired up. I think it should be 2 people working on a case study kind of a thing. And then the questions are pretty standard across the board, which is what kind of emotional labor is that individual experiencing? How is it negatively impacting them? And then the second piece is how would you utilize the strategies for maximizing agency? And what I'm going to do, we're going to do this for about 7 minutes or so. And then what I'm going to do is go back to just the 4 agentic strategies so that you've got the words right there. And that's about it. We're going to take time to do that in these next 7 minutes. And if you're online, I'm hoping that, I don't know where the case studies are for them. Okay, great. They should have it. Awesome. I hate to disrupt the conversations. Out of curiosity, how many groups did case study 1? Okay, so I see 2 tables over here. Which tables did case study 2? Okay, and case study 3? All right, okay, cool. So let's start with case study number 1, and I'm curious to hear, is there maybe one group that would like to speak or share on what they've decided? Here's the best part. There's no real right or wrong, right, in terms of how you respond to this. It's just more of working through a particular scenario and seeing what would work best. We're all different, too, so we might have different ideas. So case study 1, before we go with someone to share some insight, we have an very active student leader, Rochelle. They use they, she pronouns, first-gen college student. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to give a brief overview. This student holds many positions as a resident assistant, has a leadership position in the student assembly, and an active member of LEGO. And these are all names from the Rutgers community that I was just kind of looking up online. And then Rochelle has made it their personal mission to support first-gen students and holds office hours with this particular community. And is ramping up. There's always 8 new students that she's committed to meeting with. And then Rochelle's been stressed lately and having a hard time getting up in the morning, suppressed appetite, things of that nature. And there's a big Lego event coming up, and they keep getting left holding the bag. And so They're having a hard time with all this, and as a result of kind of coping with all these things, has decreased their time for workouts, their morning routine, and decreased the amount of time that they stay in touch with their siblings. So that's what's going on in Rochelle's life. So I'm curious, for folks who did case study 1, what came up for you? What emotional labor is being experienced? Yeah.
Hello.
There we go.
Okay. We said it was like emotional gymnastics a little bit. And also kind of that need to do perfect work and kind of do all of the work. I feel like you read my mind with this case study on students that we have, student leaders that we're currently dealing with. And strategies that, I've provided and Brittany and I were talking about was write out your week. And is there, first of all, is there any free time? What overlaps? And if it overlaps, like what is your priority? And then building into the free times, things like FaceTiming the family members so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle of doing everything. And so that's kind of what we got from that.
I love that. I love that. Was there another table that did this one as well? Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or in this group that you'd like to add?
I spoke to the resources that Rochelle could use to kind of get herself back on track, and speaking in Rutgers terms, our CAPS team, to speak with a counselor. Also, the Dean of Students, where it comes to her, they not eating and declining, the normal schedule.
Yeah.
So speaking with the Dean of Students to get the appropriate resources to get back on track.
Yes. I love how both tables approached this student who's doing stellar work, right? Oh, Brittany.
I just wanted to add one thing. We talked about different resources on campus. So since she's a resident assistant, she started the program there, reaching out to the hall director. Is there any other RAs that can even assist temporarily until the event's over? Ensuring she has mealtime. There's a mealtime that she works with the first-gen students. Maybe that's where you participate because you don't want to leave them, but you also get to eat at the same time. And then also the social justice office. So for us here, Darnell may not be able to take his time personally, but he has federal work studies students. They have a graduate assistant that may be able to help out as well.
I love that. So providing some more institutionalized support for the great work that's being done, and also trying to free Rochelle up so that Rochelle can actually eat a meal and it not be work-related meals, and also just take care of herself. So I loved all those resources and suggestions. And, oh, here it is. I put on here that performing excellence and permanent exhaustion were big pieces coming up. And the protecting time, I think, came up a lot in terms of the agentic way to kind of navigate this, and building that schedule. So I really liked helping the student map it out so that they can see, oh, I really don't have time, and not all of these things are as important as I might decide to make them. I think the only other thing that I'm left sitting with too is that perhaps an SOS group, or like whoever this student views as a mentor, can help them kind of decide about their leadership position and communal accountability. So it's okay to let things fail, or it's okay to step back. You know, you're one person, you can't take on everyone else's responsibilities, and so that might be helpful too. So I love that. Thank you. So for case study 2, y'all, we have a faculty member, Dr. Jones, Dr. Danny Jones, she, her pronouns. She's tenure track. Her research centers the experience of Black women leaders in nonprofit sectors. She's prepped a new course, a brand new course for her academic department with the highest numbers of BIPOC students enrolled in that class. Of recent, she notices that she's being identified as the expert on all things related to DEI, and she's being asked by her department chair to do additional labor. She's being asked by other faculty colleagues to come into their courses and share her expertise. So these demands can be challenging for her. And then she also is dealing with her mid-year evaluation feedback, which is calling for more time on research, and that unfortunately her mentoring role with students is not carrying enough weight in her 10-year dossier. So these are some of those challenges, and she fears that students will negatively rate her course evaluations if she scales back her engagement with students, and she also feels the pressure to work harder to prove that she belongs to her academic department. So those are things that are happening with Dr. Jones. So I know we had one table. Focus on that. I'm so curious to hear what came up.
So unfortunately, Dr. Jones is in a really difficult situation, being as though her job does ask of her all these things to be in leadership, to support her colleagues, but then also to support the students. And while we do identify she's viewed as the expert, she can't be the only person on campus to do these things. So when it comes to what kind of emotional labor that they're experiencing, we said almost all of them. So they kind of all feed into each other. But the one that we've highlighted was the combating exploitations. And then I had another one where I did two asterisks next to the constant exhaustion, like forming permanent exhaustion, because they mentioned that they're not doing enough, or from that mid-year review feel like they're not doing enough. And so now they're thinking of how they need to work harder, as if they're already not working hard enough.
Right.
And so that can again cause that kind of hamster wheel effect, and that will lead to that permanent exhaustion. We did have some discussion on ways that they could strategize for maximizing agency. Definitely leaning on that SOS, that support group. We also wrote down documentation, so maybe noting what you're being asked of and those extra, conversations you're having with your colleagues' classes or additional work that's outside of your teaching load, but also kind of translating it into working hours, and then making sure that you're showing and tallying up what that work and that labor is that you're giving. And then I think, Sherry, what was one other one I was missing?
In addition to the SOS crew conversation, she needs to now have a brave conversation with the colleagues, because she's also navigating a lot of their emotions.
Yes.
We were talking about
Y'all
student
did good.
empowerment, actually, similar to Group 1, but thinking of some of our institutional resources is within our DICE division, we do have a faculty diversity group that might be a great installation for this faculty member to participate in, to get some extra advice, to get more accountability, more support. And I think we're going to do that plan with this faculty member, right? Here's our needs. This is how we're going to plan it out as our extra way, but definitely reaffirming the students about their resources that they have on campus to empower them to own it just a little bit more, because there is tons of support that's available for the student. So we just got to work with this faculty member to scaffold a little bit, use some of those teaching and pedagogy tools that we have here, is also to implement different instruction and support across all boards.
I love that. This was a tricky one, too. It was really complex. And are there faculty in the space today at all? Okay, yes. So that faculty life and the pressure of, to some it might look like faculty just teach, but there's a responsibility to balance the level of scholarly work, teaching, and service to your institution. And different institutions place different values or percentages of your time that should be focused on these things. And so I found this to be tricky as well, but what rose up to me in thinking about how I would coach Dr. Jones is just, there are ways that you can build some collaborative partnerships, like where maybe you started this with your research and you're trying to increase your grad students' prestigious fellowships and things like that, but maybe there are some departments who can help provide that kind of student engagement so that you don't have to be the number one face of that engagement to kind of save some of your time. So things that I put here, definitely combating exploitation, and performing excellence was like all through it, though you could make the argument for all of them. These were the two that came up for me as well. And so what I also liked when I think of protecting time and what was said as a recommendation was making the invisible visible. So when you start tracking your hours, because no one's tracking them for you in any type of role you have, they just tell you what your job description is. But if you really track what you do in a week and kind of categorize where those things are falling and how well they align with your job description or not, can really help you in making the case, one, for a promotion, but two, it can also help you scale down if you're, okay, I'm spending a lot of time doing things that are outside of what I'm being asked to do. And so I'm going to start taking these things out and just focusing on what I've been asked to do. Now, in terms of adding more, there's conversations that you can have, especially if your passion is missing from the work that you're being asked to do, but you want to negotiate that with your folks, right? So I really like the idea of tracking it down and then having to reprioritize things that make sense, especially as it relates to earning tenure. So if that is the goal, to get tenure, there's going to have to be some adjustments that are made in doing that. And then the last case study. So this one is with a staff member. This is Jose de los Santos, and he just got this huge award at his institution, Staff of the Year, and it was based on an initiative hold on, let me make sure I have the right one. Oops, there we go. He's gotten this big award for this transformative program addressing basic needs and food insecurity of undergrad students. So that's exciting. And it meant a lot to him because it took a lot to get that handled. And then with this recognition, he's been asked by an associate vice chancellor to expand that initiative with no additional resources. So expand it and increase campus-wide advocacy training for staff and faculty across the campus. And so the concern is that there's no additional support. In addition to that, and being a director for Center for Student Success, they have a supervisor that's not as present or supportive or engaging with him. So this supervisor misses their meetings or cancels them, makes requests for last-minute reports. So he's often trying to do that and recently asked to make budget cuts, and then finds out that after he makes that proposal was not utilized and different things from his budget were cut. So he's very challenged by lack of communication and direction from his supervisor and disappointed at how much time has gone in on tasks that were not acknowledged or implemented. So for folks who worked on this one, I'm curious to hear what are the emotional labor that's being experienced, and then also what are some strategies to maximize agency? Where are we talking? Is there a hand up? There we go.
Right, so I think we definitely identified constraining their personal feelings in this one, specifically after having worked on this proposal on the budget cuts and then it not being addressed. And so one of the strategies that might go into addressing that would be setting boundaries and then speaking your truth, having these really difficult conversations with the person that is managing you, and although that's very hard, like it's necessary in their case. I don't know if anything else from this one. I think also emotional gymnastics, they had to engage in that as part of their role and being able to manage what they were doing. And I think this was a good example of good work being valued by just getting more work for them, unfortunately.
Thank you for that. Yes. Did you all have this one too? Yeah, they said everything. Other than like my joke is update your LinkedIn. Honestly, updating your LinkedIn can also be a strategy. That is agentic. That is the definition of agency. Saying, you know what, I'm out. We always have that option. I have a funny story about that too. I'll tell after this. I definitely put down the same in terms of constraining personal feelings and the emotional gymnastics of like trying to figure out how to fill in the gaps, how to do things when your supervisor is not as present or available. And it does feel like a burn when you've done this immediate work that was like needed and hard to do, and then your recommendations weren't even taken in consideration without a heads up, like, hey, I got the report and actually I'm not using any of it. Like, to not hear that and find out when everyone else finds out what's gonna be cut is really hard, and it also makes it difficult to lead your team when it's like you tell your team one thing and now actually we're cutting these other things. And so setting boundaries and speaking truth were like really important in this case, and having a serious, courageous conversation. And I do think a little bit of SOS is needed too, to kind of practice how you would go about having this difficult conversation, because it's not necessarily a negotiation. It's like this is really messed up, and how do we move forward in terms of repairing trust? Because, you know, you're pulling the rug out from underneath me. This is also one of those examples of good work is rewarded with more work. And it's great when we get awards and things like that. And then how do we also say, I love that you thought of me to expand this initiative, but we are at capacity as a team. So unless you can come with the additional resources, our team cannot expand this in a way that you're asking. So what are the resources that you're going to provide so we can rise to the challenge? And if that answer is no, then advocating for your team, because that's just not going to be feasible. And I do agree in terms of like in this scenario where it's that extreme, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it can be even more extreme than that. You always have the decision of whether or not this position works for you or not. And sometimes that speaks even more volumes when you have to just step away from it altogether. And I've been in a weird situation with a dean, not at the current institution I'm at, but when I was an administrator, and we were navigating the pandemic. And again, I needed to take care of myself, and I felt like too many exec leaders wanted me to kind of be the mediator or the in-between person. And so I was in the process of setting boundaries, and one of my trigger points was faculty could choose whether or not they came to campus, but staff had to be on campus and put their life on the line no matter what. And the response to me bringing that challenge up was, well, you always have a choice. And I was like, well, there's no real choice. And I was told, well, you could leave. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was funny because he wasn't expecting me to say, oh, okay. You know what, you're right. I can do that. And he was like, no, I didn't mean like actually. I'm just saying like how, you know, other people are dealing with this. And I was like, no, you were talking to me as well. And you're right. I can make a change when I need to. And so I did. I put a 2-week notice in further down the line when I secured another opportunity to become faculty. And I needed more agency in my work life. And the faculty track gave me that opportunity in a way. It has its own challenges though, but for the sake of this conversation, it was very interesting that, you know, some executive leaders kind of think in that way too, like you could just go if you don't like it. But then after that, I want y'all to know, when I left this institution, I was contacted by that same person asking for favors for, you know, can you do this, can you do that, can you share with me your job description when you asked for a promotion? Like, I'd actually like to create that position. And I was like, actually, I would love for you to work with your peers and your peer institutions to decide the best way to put together a job description. I'm good. That was such a bizarre request to ask after I left. So standing in your truth, speaking your truth, and making hard decisions sometimes, which can be scary, can actually be the most rewarding, like, payout. And I feel like I now work for a Black woman who's amazing, and I'm in a different work environment that allows me to encourages me actually to express the fullness of my voice. And so that was like such a great way to kind of like, you know, close this out. I appreciate everyone for engaging in these activities. I do have some key takeaways, and then if there's cute questions, I can give some answers, or we can just chat it up informally as well. But Remember to really take time thinking about how emotional labor shows up in your work life. I would also add in your personal life too. And start to implement some of these strategies, to start to practice them, right? Or to work with key people in your network who support you, who are team you, to kind of address some of these challenges in these invisibilized experiences that aren't often talked about. Take time to understand how you contribute to high-level emotional labor. And that's for all parties in this, like staff, students, and faculty. If we're supervising or we hold some type of power over another individual, we need to be conscious of how we're asking people to do their work. And how are we helping affirm and validate the work that's being done? How are we also saying, hey, you're excellent at what you do, but I also want you to have a humanized experience, and you don't have to operate at this level 24/7. Who are you sharing this workload with? How are we getting other people to the table? How are you setting up a legacy document so that you feel good about leaving and not leaving things in array? Like, those are things that you can do when you're holding a position of power or authority to ensure that folks feel heard. Having your whole team go through an exercise of looking at their job description and prioritizing what's important to them, where their passions are, is a great exercise to also learn from your team what's missing from their work, or better ways that you can support them in getting things done. So that's kind of radical, because you also have to be open to the feedback that comes with asking your team to do such an exercise. And then again, I'm huge around collaboration. So I encourage folks to embrace aspects of collaborative leadership and use that as a strategy to kind of redistribute workload so that there's more support. And then developing strategic plans to minimize team burnout, because that's a real thing when you have to go hard in the paint. And where, as a department or a team, are we actually setting up time to recover and repair, right? So those things should also be a part of how we navigate emotional labor in our teams. So those are my takeaways for you all. And my closing reflection, I did not add the Padlet link, but if you still have it up, there's a question on there around an agentic strategy that you plan to use to minimize your emotional labor. So I'd encourage you to actually add that, and maybe one way to hold yourself accountable to that, which would be awesome, and it's good information for us to know as well. So take some time to do that, and based on time, I think this is it, actually. We're like 6 minutes over. So yeah, thank you all so much. And thanks for those of you online as well.